I was 67 years old when my wife sat across from me at the same kitchen table where we had eaten dinner together for more than 40 years, and told me something that made the entire life I thought I had built collapse in a single moment. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just looked at me the way you look at a stranger you're finally done pretending to care about. Then she said quietly, "You deserve to know the truth. I never loved you the way a wife should. I always loved your brother more." And in that moment, I realized something that still keeps me awake at night. My marriage hadn't just ended. It had never really been real to begin with. We lived in a quiet suburb of Grand Rapids, Michigan. It was the kind of neighborhood where people knew when you painted your shutters or when you bought a new lawnmower. I had spent 36 years working as a senior foreman at the local manufacturing plant, putting in overtime nearly every weekend so Susan could stay home and our two sons, Brian and Kevin, could have everything they needed. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought the house, the savings, and the quiet life we shared were the rewards for a lifetime of hard work. Susan's words didn't just hurt. They felt like a physical weight pressing the air out of my lungs. My brother James had always been the charming one. He moved to Chicago decades ago, a successful lawyer who visited only for holidays, bringing expensive gifts and stories that made everyone laugh. I never suspected a thing, not once in 40 years. "Why now, Susan?" I managed to ask. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone much older and much weaker than the man I thought I was. "Because James is retiring," she said, her hand steady as she folded a napkin. "And because the house is finally paid off." "I've done my time, Robert. I raised the boys. I kept your home. Now, I want what I was supposed to have 40 years ago." She reached into her pocket and slid a set of legal documents across the table. They weren't just divorce papers. It was a partition suit for the house and a formal notice that she had already moved a significant portion of our joint savings into a private account. "You need to find a place to stay," she added, standing up. "The boys are coming over tonight to help me pack your things." I stared at her, waiting for a flicker of the woman I'd kissed every morning before work, the woman I'd held when her mother passed away. There was nothing, just a cold, calculated efficiency. I realized then that while I was out working double shifts to pay for her life, she had been counting down the days until she could discard me. But the hardest part wasn't Susan. The hardest part was when the front door opened and my oldest son, Brian, walked in. Not to comfort me, but to hand me a cardboard box. Brian didn't look me in the eye when he set the box on the kitchen table. He was 38 years old, a man I had guided through every scraped knee and every career doubt. I had paid for his tuition at Michigan State, worked extra shifts to help him with the down payment on his own home, and never asked for a dime in return. I gave him everything I had. "Dad, just make this easy," he said. His voice was flat, professional, like he was dealing with a difficult client rather than his own father. "Mom's been unhappy for a long time. You were always at the plant. You weren't really present." The unfairness of it felt like a blow to the gut. I was at the plant so he could have the life he lived now. I was at the plant so Susan never had to worry about a medical bill or a grocery receipt. "Where's Kevin?" I asked, looking toward the door for my younger son. "He's at the storage unit," Susan answered for him. "He's setting up a space for the furniture you're taking. We've already decided what stays with the house." It was all choreographed. They had been talking behind my back for months, maybe years. My own children had been complicit in a plan to dismantle my life the moment the mortgage was settled. I looked at the legal papers again. Susan wasn't just asking for the house. She was claiming that because I had been the primary earner and she the homemaker, she was entitled to 70% of my pension and the entirety of our liquid savings to equalize her future standard of living with my brothers. "Does James know about this?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Susan smiled then, a small, sharp expression I didn't recognize. "James is the one who hired the lawyers, Robert. He's been helping me prepare for this since last autumn. My own brother." The man I had shared a bedroom with as a boy, The man I had bailed out of debt when he was starting his firm 40 years ago. He hadn't just taken my wife's heart. He was using his legal expertise to ensure I was left with nothing but the clothes in those cardboard boxes. "You're leaving me homeless, Susan," I said quietly. "I have nowhere to go on a Tuesday night with 3 boxes and a pension you're trying to freeze." "You have your health," she replied, turning her back to me to start clearing the cabinets. "And you have your work ethic. You always told the boys that hard work was its own reward. Now you get to prove it." Brian took my arm, not to steady me, but to steer me toward the door. I looked around the living room one last time. The dent in the drywall from when the boys played ball, the recliner where I'd spent my few hours of rest. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene where 40 years of my life had been stolen. I walked out onto the porch, the Michigan air biting through my thin shirt, and realized I didn't even have a key to my own truck. Susan had taken it off my ring while I was sitting at the table. I stood on the sidewalk of our quiet street in Grand Rapids, clutching the 3 cardboard boxes Brian had handed me. My truck was still in the driveway, but the doors were locked, and Susan had the keys. I was 67 years old, a man who had worked 36 years at the plant, and suddenly I was standing in the cold with nowhere to go. I called my younger son, Kevin. I thought maybe he was different. Maybe he didn't know the full extent of what his mother and Brian were doing. "Kevin, I'm standing on the curb," I said when he finally picked up. "Your mother took my keys. I need a place to stay tonight." "Dad, I'm at the storage unit," he replied. His voice was tight, strained. "Look, Mom said you were being difficult. She said you tried to hide money from her in Alaska." "I can't have that drama at my house. My wife, Amanda, is already stressed enough with the kids." "Hide money? Kevin, I was working. I gave you everything I had for 40 years. "I know, Dad, but things change. Maybe you should check into a motel for a few nights. We'll talk later." The line went dead. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the Michigan wind. I realized then that Susan hadn't just taken the house and the savings. She had poisoned my sons against me. She had painted me as a liar and a burden so they wouldn't feel guilty about throwing me away like an old piece of furniture. I walked 3 miles to a cheap motel near the highway. My legs ached and my breath came in short, ragged bursts. I checked in using the one credit card Susan hadn't managed to cancel yet. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. I sat on the edge of the thin mattress and opened the first box Brian had given me. Inside weren't my clothes or my personal belongings. It was my old drafting tools from my early years, a few framed photos with the glass cracked, and a stack of medical records from my physical therapy last year. Susan hadn't even packed me a change of clothes. She had packed the things she considered clutter. I pulled out my phone and dialed my brother James. I didn't expect him to answer, but he did. "Robert," he said. He sounded calm, almost bored. "I assume Susan spoke with you. You did this, James. You helped her take everything while I was working double shifts." "I'm an attorney, Robert. I advocate for my clients. Susan has been my client for a long time," he said. I could hear the smirk in his voice. "Don't make this bigger than it is. You've got your pension. Just sign the papers and move on." "Move on to where? I'm in a motel with nothing." "That's a personal matter," he replied. "And Robert, don't call this number again. All communication goes through my office now." As I hung up, I noticed a small, crumpled envelope at the bottom of the box. It was a letter I'd received months ago from a patent attorney in Seattle regarding the geolocation software Tom and I had been tinkering with in our spare time. I had forgotten all about it in the chaos of the divorce. I opened it, and my hands started to shake. The letter wasn't just another legal notice. It was a formal offer from a Seattle tech firm that had been tracking the geolocation algorithm I'd helped my old friend Tom develop. They were offering $15 million to buy the software outright. I sat in that drafty motel room, staring at the figure. After the split with Tom and the necessary taxes, I was looking at over $7 million. Just hours ago, I had been planning how I would use this windfall to be the hero for my family, paying off Brian's mortgage and setting up college funds for the grandkids. I wanted to be their savior, the man who finally had something more to contribute than just taking up space. But as I looked at the 3 cardboard boxes of clutter Susan had packed for me, the warmth I'd felt for my sons turned into something cold and sharp. They didn't want my help. They wanted me gone. They were already planning to warehouse me in a state facility like Meadowbrook Gardens just to get me out of the way. Susan and James had spent months calculating how to leave me with nothing, and my own sons had stood by and watched it happen. I called my lawyer, Patricia Rodriguez, right then. My voice didn't shake this time. "Patricia, the deal is going through," I told her, "but I need to move the money immediately. I want it locked in an irrevocable trust that no one, not my wife, not my brother, and especially not my sons, can ever touch." "Robert, are you sure?" she asked. "Once it's in that trust, it's shielded from everyone, but it also changes the dynamic of your divorce." "I'm sure," I said. "They think they've already taken everything. I'm going to let them keep thinking that. I want to see exactly how far they'll go when they believe I'm a broke, pathetic old man with nowhere left to turn." By the time I hung up, the papers were being drafted to secure my $7 million. I went back to the house the next morning, shuffling my feet and wearing the same rumpled clothes from the day before. I needed to look defeated. Susan was in the kitchen, already humming as she looked at travel brochures for Chicago. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Back for more clutter, Robert?" she asked. "The deal fell through, Susan," I said, letting my voice crack just enough. "The patent wasn't solid. I'm in debt. Real debt. Over $50,000 in legal fees I can't pay." The humming stopped. She turned around, and for the first time in 40 years, I saw her look at me with genuine horror. Not because she cared about my debt, but because she realized she might be tied to it. Susan's face went from pale to a mottled red. $50,000, she shrieked, the travel brochures fluttering to the floor. "You told us this company was going to be our ticket out of here. You let us make plans, Robert. You were supposed to have millions." "I was wrong," I whispered, leaning against the counter for effect. "I gave everything I had to this family, and now I have nothing left but debt. I raised our sons to be honest men, but I've failed at that too, haven't I?" I could see the gears turning in her head. She didn't offer me a chair or a glass of water. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed Brian. Within 20 minutes, both of my sons were back in the kitchen. They stood in a semicircle around me like I was a faulty appliance they were debating whether to repair or scrap. "Dad, we've been talking to Mom and Uncle James," Brian said, his jaw set tight. "If you're truly in this much debt, you're going to drag the whole family down. You'll ruin our credit, and you'll lose the house before the divorce is even final." "I don't have a choice," I said. "I'm 67 years old. I can't go back to the plant." Kevin stepped forward, looking more annoyed than sympathetic. "There's a place called Meadowbrook Gardens," he said, echoing the name I'd heard Susan whisper. "It's a state-run facility. They take your Social Security check directly, and the state covers the rest. It's clean, it's safe, and most importantly, it's out of the way." "You want to warehouse me?" I asked, looking at my youngest son. "I raised you. I gave you everything." "Don't make this emotional, Dad," Brian snapped, using the same cold phrase Susan had probably coached him on. "We're trying to protect the family assets. If you stay here, the collectors will come for the house. If you move to Meadowbrook, you're protected." They weren't protecting me. They were protecting their inheritance. They were so eager to push me under that they didn't notice the fire returning to my eyes. That evening, after they left me with a stack of brochures for the state home, I called Patricia again. "Buy the mortgage, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and cold. "The house is behind on payments. Buy the debt through the trust. I want to see their faces when they realize the broke old man is actually their landlord." It took 4 days for the paperwork to clear. During that time, I stayed in the basement of my own house, playing the part of the broken man. I watched Susan and the boys walk through the rooms upstairs, pointing at furniture and discussing which walls Brian would knock down once I was settled in Meadowbrook. They treated me like I was already a ghost, someone who no longer had a right to occupy the space I had paid for with 36 years of sweat. On Friday morning, Susan sat me down with a pen in her hand. "We've spoken to James," she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. "He's arranged for a voluntary guardianship. You just need to sign these papers so Brian can manage your debt and get you moved into the facility by Tuesday." I looked at the documents. It was a complete surrender of my autonomy. My sons stood behind her, their arms crossed, waiting for me to disappear. "I'm not signing those," I said. I stood up, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't hunch my shoulders. I pulled a manila envelope from the inner pocket of my old work jacket. "And I'm not going to Meadowbrook." Susan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Robert, you don't have a choice. You're broke, you're in debt, and this house is going into foreclosure." "The house isn't in foreclosure anymore," I said, tossing the envelope onto the table. It slid across the wood and hit her coffee cup with a dull thud. "My trust bought the mortgage note from the bank yesterday afternoon. I own this property outright now." Brian stepped forward, his face twisting in confusion. "Your trust? Dad, you said the deal fell through. You said you were $50,000 in debt." "I lied," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. "The company sold for $15 million. My share was over $7 million. And because you were all so eager to throw me away the moment you thought I was useless, I moved every cent into a trust you will never be able to touch." The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Susan ripped open the envelope, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she realized she was holding a 30-day notice to quit the premises. "You're kicking us out?" Kevin whispered, his voice finally breaking. "We're your family." "You were a family when you thought I had something to give you," I replied. "But when you thought I was a burden, you were ready to put me in a place that smells like urine and broken dreams." I walked toward the front door, leaving them staring at the proof of their own greed. I had one more stop to make before I left Michigan for good. I drove to my brother James's law office downtown. He was on the phone, probably finalizing his own retirement plans, when I walked past his secretary and into his inner sanctum. I didn't say a word. I simply laid a copy of the forensic report and the trust documents on his mahogany desk. "The geolocation deal closed, James," I said. "And I know about the advocacy you provided Susan. Every cent of my wealth is now locked where your legal tricks can't reach it." He looked at the numbers on the page, and for the first time in his life, my brother was speechless. I walked out of the building and didn't look back. I spent the next week moving the few things I actually cared about, the old photos and my tools, into a small apartment I'd rented in a town 3 hours away. I didn't give Susan or the boys the address. I changed my phone number and instructed Patricia to handle all further communication regarding the house sale and the divorce settlement. A month later, I received a final text from Brian on my old tablet. He told me that Susan had moved into a small apartment near James in Chicago, and that he and Kevin were struggling to keep up with their own expenses now that my support had vanished. I didn't reply. I'm 71 years old now. I live in a quiet place with a view of the water, far from the suburbs of Grand Rapids. I spend my mornings walking along the shore and my afternoons working on new designs just for the sake of the craft. Sometimes I think about that kitchen table and the 40 years I spent building a life for people who were only waiting for me to finish paying for it. I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel the quiet weight of the truth. I gave them everything I had for 4 decades. Now, I'm keeping the rest for myself. If this story meant something to you, subscribe. There's more to come.